Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Gayla Scrivener Show. I am so glad you're here today. Now, I gotta tell you something. I'm an 80s girl. Now, that's the decade I remember the most growing up in. In the 70s, I was just a little kid, and I don't have a ton of memories of that time frame. At least not as it goes with pulp culture stuff. In the 90s, I was in my early 20s and raising my daughter Megan. And when you're devoted to your little one, and then you split that with a full-time job, I paid little attention to the world around me. So I don't remember much of that decade either. But the 1980s, that's the decade I remember the most. The songs, like Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Madonna's Like a Virgin, Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, Survivor, Eye of the Tiger, Rick Springfield's Jesse's Girl. And you've got Prince, Michael Jackson, Culture Club, Whitesnake, Queen, and I cannot forget Duran Duran. Now, for some reason, I had a lot of posters of Duran Duran from my Tiger Beat magazines pasted all over my wall. Okay, another little secret. I still have my original turntable and cassette player stereo that I got for Christmas one year. I was going to let it go, but Robert wanted to keep it since it's still in great shape, just in case he wants to play any records someday, like we have space for that. But we keep it in storage, and on that clear lid of the record player, I have a Duran Duran bumper sticker prominently displayed. We keep the stereo, we keep the Duran Duran sticker. It just makes me smile. Now, I remember the movies back then. Goonies, Rocky, Karate Kid, Footloose, The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles. I watched all those John Hughes films. And even though Star Wars came out in the late 70s, it was so amazing when it was available on the movie channel. My brother and I had a competition one summer on who watched Star Wars more. We had it memorized. Then, what was so cool is we got an Atari one year. Yep, one of those clunky video games. We didn't have very many games, but the games we did have, my brother and I had a blast with. The game system was set up on an old, massive console TV. I only remember 3 games that we had. Night Driver, and we also had Donkey Kong and PacMan. If you're from that generation or like to play retro video games, you may know all too well of that little jingle of Game Over. Can you picture that? Now, I'd play it here on this podcast, but I'm afraid of violating any copyrights associated with the jingle. And if you wonder what I'm talking about, just Google it. You'll find it out there. So, you may be wondering, why on earth am I being so nostalgic about my teenage years in the 80s? You know, it's funny how a song or a sound-byte plays in your mind when a memory is triggered, or something happens to trigger a particular song or sound-byte. And oh my goodness, the PacMan dying sound was playing loud and clear just the other day. Why? Well, my husband Robert was working on transferring all these thousands of images from our cameras to our external drive. We had just returned home from our 1-month-long overlanding trip, and we had taken a ton of pictures, gigabytes worth, and we took gigabytes worth of video to work up with our travel blog. Been there doing that. Now, feel free to check out that blog if you want. The website is simply beentheredoingthat.com. On several occasions during our trip, Robert would dump all of our images onto this external drive. In this external drive, we have volumes of them, and they're just for pictures and videos. And we have a filing system. We were home, and he wanted to finish the task of image dumping from all of our devices for the last few days of our trip. And did I say we have a ton of images? And what do you think happened? He plugged in that external drive so that he could add more images to it, and he got this message. He got this message that said, "Disk corrupt," and then there was an option to scan it. Now, sometimes when this happens, you can still access the files, but not this time. He couldn't access anything. I told him, let me try to access that external drive onto my computer and see if I got the same results. And that's when I heard it. That game over jingle. Yep, we couldn't access literally thousands of images, gigabytes worth. It was a 2 terabyte drive, and it was at least half full. Game over. But I have a happy ending to this little story, luckily. I didn't want to be hasty in punching buttons and scanning things and downloading just any program to help try to recover the data. In between working on other projects, and as ideas were kind of percolating in my mind of what direction to go, I'd do some Google searches to do some research. At first, the search results were simply articles selling some sort of program to download to retrieve the data. I was almost desperate enough to download something, anything to help. But I kept my cool. I paused and let my thoughts simmer for a bit. I rearranged my search question and found a YouTube video of a simple command function to check and repair the disk. I don't do this often, getting into the command prompt, but the process sounded reasonable to me. So I gave it a try, and it worked. Oh, I was dancing on sunshine. Oh, wait, still stuck in the 80s. Sorry about that. But I was kicking myself because I know better. We did not have a backup of that drive. We have been using it for months. There were more images and more memories on that and more videos and photography stuff that we use in our travel blog and for our personal stuff for months. And I hadn't backed it up once. Not that drive. And I know better. We have multiple external drives to access our files. I do backups of those drives and try to have some of them off-site of where we are, and those we rarely access. But that drive, I had never, ever backed up since we started using it. Holy cow, I know better than that. Now, I could give the excuse of being way too busy or just not wanting to take the time to copy the data to a different place. Well, I think it's easy to get this false sense of security that our data will be just fine out there. We take it for granted that the hardware won't fail. We simply take things for granted. At least, I'm speaking for myself here. How about you? Now, do you have regular backups? Now, it's one thing to lose all your personal data that you've stored on your phone or your laptop. You've got a gob of photos of friends and family dumped in random places all over the place in different computers. I better set the record straight. I am not an expert when it comes to backup and data retrieval. No, I'm not that techie. That's not a service that I do with Scrivener Solutions, and I'll just help friends and family if they ask. And as with anything, if I'm way over my head and have no idea what I'm doing, I've got some computer techie friends that have great advice, great direction, and great service. But let's talk backups as a small business owner. If you lose your personal photos, documents, or videos, it is certainly a sad, sad occasion. But then, when you have a business, losing your data could really, really cost you. Depending on the type of business you do, the data you keep, you have a responsibility in keeping it safe. If you lose your customer data, it'll be quite costly in trying to retrieve it, or you may never be able to retrieve it. You don't just have to worry about computer crashes and malfunctions, but also with natural disasters. When I was living and working in St. Pete, Florida, I remember a little flooding that happened at the office one time due to a hurricane that was out in the Gulf. I was talking with some folks in the office next door, and they had some water come up into their suite. All their towers for their computers were sitting on the floor. That's typically where we put them. And their office manager's computer had gotten sopping wet. It was toast. Water and electronics, they don't go well together. I had a computer guy that always would say that computers never get thirsty because he always would move our cups of drink away from our keyboards. It's kind of humorous. But getting back to that office manager's computer, that was toast. That was the computer in the office, the only computer in the office that had their QuickBooks data on it. And that was before online QuickBooks. It was a desktop version. Of course, QuickBooks was terribly, terribly important to them because it showed all of their accounts receivable for all of their clients. And they had hundreds of thousands of dollars in their aged receivables. They were quite concerned that they didn't know who owed what. They asked for my help because they knew I worked in QuickBooks a lot. I said, well, I'm quite familiar with restoring a backup. I've done it before, and I'd be happy to help. The only thing was they had never, ever, never, not once, backed up their QuickBooks. What? No backup? There was no way I could help them. And that was well beyond my capabilities. I helped them look for a much more techie person than me to see if they could retrieve the data from a fried hard drive. Why on earth wouldn't you back up the most important piece of your business? It's beyond me. At that time, I would back up the company I was working for. I backed up their QuickBooks data on a little flash drive and would take it home with me each evening. I think I had maybe 2 or 3 flash drives, and I had a system of rotating those drives. So I would have more versions of the backup, but I did it every day. That system became ingrained for me with my very, very first job out of high school. For the ophthalmologist that I was working for, I was responsible for doing their medical billing. We had a database where we'd post charges and payments. And I believe that the schedule was linked to that database as well. Now, I know that was way before electronic medical records, and it was a fairly simple and straightforward database. It certainly wasn't web-based because I would have to dial a modem to send electronic claims to Medicare, and that was the only carrier at the time that was accepting electronic claims. Boy, I'm dating myself. But that database needed to be backed up each and every day at the end of the day, and that's what I did. Those backup tapes resembled 8-track tapes. Boy, this episode, I am really aging myself by going back to the archives of technology and pop culture. But anyway, early on in my career, I learned that backing up data and redundancy is super important. It was put to me this way, and it has stuck with me all these years. Back up as often as you want to recreate. That means the longer you wait to back up when systems go down, not if systems, but when systems go down, and data is lost, you are as good as your last backup. Then you have to pull records and recreate, or rather, do all that hard work all over again. Even though backups and redundancy in business has been good practice for years, it really wasn't until 9/11 to understand how important it was to have off-site backups. There was a lot of data lost on that terrible day. Very reputable companies did their due diligence in backing up their systems. The only problem, their backups were lost too. I remember calling on medical claim statuses on several patient accounts weeks and months after 9/11. And if the claims service center was in the Twin Towers, there were some delicate conversations around trying to get the payments reissued. That's when companies, big and small, began really thinking about backups and not just doing what I did and taking a backup home with them with a flash drive or a backup tape, but having off-site backups. Online backup storage became more popular. or systems that could send the data to another office clear across the country. So let's fast forward to today. On a practical level, what should you do as a small business owner to save your data, to keep your data safe? Do you currently have a process of backing up your data consistently? In our digital world, we can have everything at our fingertips. We are accustomed to that. We use our computers for practically everything. Since it's there all the time, you may be like what I was and just get complacent that the data will just always be there and you just take it for granted. You may have this fleeting thought that, oh yeah, I'll back it up. I'll get around to it when I have time. But then when I saw that disk corrupt message for our image external drive, sure, it wasn't directly tied to our company files. It's stuff for us personally and for our travel blog. But still, all that work, all that data, it could have been lost. I keep a backup of my client stuff on a separate external drive than our working files. I also have an archive file of client data that I stow away where I don't look at it very often and it's not really readily available. But I have been surprised about how clients will ask me for files even though we haven't worked together for years. For the most part, I seem to find what I need to get for them. I have tried a service a while back to sync backups from one computer to another. I could somehow connect my laptop to my mom's desktop in a different city and do backups. But the system didn't work well for me. It has been so long ago, and I don't really remember the service name now because I did abandon it quite some time ago. And there are also cloud-based backups. This is different than using things like Google Docs or Dropbox. Now, I don't have much experience with cloud-based backups because all the ones that I've seen good reviews on have such tiny, in my perspective, such tiny amount of space for the budget that I would want to create for that. We have terabytes of images and design files and client things. We just have terabytes worth of data. Yes, they are important to us, but terabytes of cloud backup is time consuming to get it synced up, and it's not within my budget, at least not right now. From what I gather in my recent research, services like Dropbox or Google Docs shouldn't be considered a backup solution just because your documents and your images are in cloud storage. Now, the Scrivener Solutions team uses Dropbox extensively. I like it a lot. I like that I can still work from any computer if I want to, simply by knowing my username and password for my Dropbox account. I may be slowed down when my computer crashes, but I'm not disabled. I don't like to keep any files stored on my computer's hard drive that I'm not okay with losing. I do back up my synced Dropbox files onto a separate drive. My process is that I prefer my collection of external drives for my backups. They are labeled, and I have replication and redundancy. Now, my dad is very big on redundancy. He has backups of his backups, which in turn are backed up, of course. Now, I don't go to that extreme, but in light of this week's events, of this close call we had, I have this renewed exhilaration of interest in spreading the word of doing your due diligence in backing up your data. For all practical purposes, collecting external drives, you can copy your files to an external drive, label it, and stash it away. You can have a system of whatever frequency you feel is right for you, but as long as it's frequent, not never, not every 2 or 3 years, but on a regular basis. If you have privacy concerns, you may want to consider a safety deposit box for storage. I don't know. As I said earlier, I'm not an expert whiz when it comes to backing up data. But I don't think not being a whiz should be an excuse for not having good backup practices in your business. Before purchasing any programs, see what the reviews are. See what kind of help they provide. There are many companies out there, and some of them will only have chat options and no phone number. Maybe you prefer to talk to a real person. Well, that's certainly something to consider. And you'd want to know about their service and how their customer service works before a dreaded disaster happens. Now, it's a good idea, and what I tend to do is I would use a service that my IT friends would recommend. I'd listen to them to see which services they've used and have been happy with during the recovery process. It's one thing to hit a button to back up the data and watch the system churn and save all those little bits and bytes, but it's a whole nother story on the ease of restoring the backup. IT folks know what services have better restoring capabilities because they are the very ones tasked with fixing things when things go wrong. Don't let excuses of, I don't know how, or I'm not techie, stop you from saving your important data. Those are simply excuses. You can either learn how to back up your own data by Googling or having someone show you. So don't let time go by and have it in the back of your mind, because that dreaded thing may happen to you. Your computer may crash. Your drive becomes corrupt. Or you spill tea on your laptop. Stuff like that happens. While I take care of the majority of our backup for our files at Scrivener Solutions, Brandy on our team has it in her routine to back up our WordPress sites that we happen to manage. I can see as Scrivener Solutions grows that I'll be delegating backup tasks in the future. I'll also be enhancing my systems, and that's what we need to do. As our business grows, we need to improve our systems. But for now, what I'm doing works well for me. Who knows? More of our clients may ask the Scrivener Solutions team to help organize their files and data, and then stay on a routine helping them make sure their backups are done. Keeping you organized in that manner is certainly a virtual assistant task. Even if that virtual assistant is the one that helps you organize your time to meet up with your IT professional to create the system, they can help you make sure that that system is implemented. When disaster strikes, it's best to have a good system of backing up your data on a regular basis. I'm curious. Do you have a backup routine? If so, what is it? What services do you use? If not, I urge you to gain the knowledge to back up your files. Make the investment to hire someone to get a system set up for you that is within your budget and that works well for you. If it's not an automatic process and you need help keeping up with the routine, delegate the task. Now drop me a note at info@scrivenersolutions.com. That's info@SCRIVENER solutions.com, and let me know what your backup disasters might have been. Or better yet, what have been your backup saves? I sure do look forward to hearing from you, to hear your ideas and your stories. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was helpful for you. Maybe you were a little bit entertained as I drifted back into the 80s. At any rate, I'm glad that you were here with me today. I'd love it and would be honored if you'd subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love for you to share a review. Thanks again. And until next time, have a fantastic week.